there's an awful lot of physiology going on in wound care. There's an awful lot of science, and most people aren't doing it at all, and certainly not doing it right.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. We are a production of MD Coaches, a company dedicated to putting healthcare professionals back in charge of healthcare delivery by coaching, mentoring, and supporting physicians at all stages of their career. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Before we get into my interview today, here's a question for you. Have you ever considered a different way of practicing medicine? Whether you're burned out, need a change of pace, or you're just looking to supplement your income, locum tenens might be the solution for you. If you're not sure where to start, locumstory.com is the place where you can get real, unbiased answers to your questions. They answer basic questions like, what is locum tenens? To more complex questions about pay ranges, taxes, various specialties, and how locum tenens can work for you. Check them out at locumstory.com or drpodcastnetwork.com/locumstory and get all the answers. Well, my interview guest today had a really interesting prelude to his medical career. He began as a Navigator bombardier in the Strategic Air Command, and then he switched gears and went on to a highly successful career as a surgeon and subsequently a leader in the discipline of chronic wound care. There are lots of stories to tell along the way, so let's hear my conversation with Dr. James Ettien. And it is a great pleasure for me to be speaking today with my old friend and former surgical partner and colleague, Dr. James Ettien, currently up in Nashville, well, up for me, but in Nashville, Tennessee. Jim, it's great to have you on the show today, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Always my pleasure.
The recently retired Dr. Ettien, I might add. So how is retirement working out for you so far?
Retirement is unusual. Both my wife and I retired pretty close to the same time, and we look at each other a lot and say, what the hell are we going to do now?
That does sound like a bit of a potentially difficult situation. So, Jim, what I want to do today is what we always do, and that is begin at the beginning. I've been fascinated. One of the most fun things about doing this show to me is discovering how few people have a straight path into a medical career, and I think yours sort of fits that story very well. So let's begin at the beginning. Well, tell me about growing up. You were born in Chattanooga, I know, but I'm curious about where the influence came from with respect to what you eventually started to do with your life, which was largely literary. But tell me about growing up and your siblings and that kind of thing.
Well, I was born in Chattanooga. Lived most of my early life there, pretty much not in the city, but more out in the far suburbs, I guess you'd say. And didn't spend a lot of time with friends because there weren't that many people out there. So I had to make up a lot of things to do, and that probably is still going on today, so don't believe anything I say. But I was the oldest of 4 children. I had 2 sisters and 1 brother. One sister became a archaeologist, believe it or not. My brother became a nuclear technician, and my last sister was actually in the Air Force. We put her there because she wasn't doing so much otherwise. And she became, after testing, a computer technician for the main computer system for the SR-71.
Wow.
Something I could never have done.
Well, that sounds like a lot of brain power to me, but I don't hear anything about any medical influence yet. So at that point, did you have any interest in medical school at all prior to undergraduate school? I mean,
Well, yes, but I felt there were two reasons I couldn't go to medical school. One was I didn't think I was smart enough, especially in chemistry and physics. And the other is I didn't have any money. So we were pretty poor. So I said, well, maybe I'd better think of something else to do. In high school, I actually went to a different school every single year because my dad moved around a lot.
wow,
So
that's kind of hard.
it was, never had the ability to make friends quickly, but when I did make friends, they stayed my friends forever. So, which I think is more important. When I was ready to go to college, I was having a little bit of a problem because I could get accepted to pretty much any college I applied to. I just didn't have any money, so I really couldn't figure out a way to get there. I found a way to go to college through the Episcopal Church, and it was to the University of the South at Sewanee, which was an Episcopal institution and a well-known institution for writers and poets.
Yeah, indeed it was.
It was closely aligned with Vanderbilt, with the Blue Pencil and the agrarian movement. So I got sort of into that by just asking for a scholarship, and they gave me a scholarship for writing poetry, believe it or not.
Well, I'm not surprised by that. I've seen some of your poetry, and I'm not surprised by that at all. So that got you in school.
That got me in school, and then, of course, I did the things that I had to do. I had to work and took out loans and the usual thing. So once I got there, I had a few career paths open to me. I wanted to do a lot of things. Number one, I wanted to be in the military. I basically wanted to fly. I wanted to be a pilot.
Where do you think the military interest came from, other than growing up during World War II? You're not quite that old. World War II.
That may have been it. My stepfather was in the war, and he was wounded, but really never did talk about it. But there were a lot of John Wayne movies, and boy, I wanted to be just like John Wayne. But I did go into Air Force ROTC, and so I was saying, well, maybe I'll be a career military person, but more likely I'll be a school teacher teaching English. And probably, as much as I'd like to go into medicine, I doubt I can do it. So I went into Air Force ROTC and received a commission and went to get my flying physical and found out I had 20/40 vision in one eye, and that kept me out of pilot school.
Uh-huh.
So I went to Navigator school, and I said, this will be interesting because I get lost going to the drugstore. But I actually got through Navigator school and got into a B-52 training. B-FACS was the big thing at that time.
Indeed it was. Did you like the intricacies of directing a B-52 up into the Arctic Circle around the Russians and that kind of thing?
I did. I thought it was interesting. I was scared to death at first, but after a while you get pretty well used to it, and it's probably a little bit easier than it looks like. And I was in the Air Force for a while, but then I came to the conclusion that probably I was not going to become chief of staff. So I said, well, maybe I ought to go somewhere else.
So you didn't think you were going to be a top dog in the military, so you just go to medical school? Is that kind of what you're saying here?
Pretty much. One of the things that the Air Force liked in their generals were pilots, and I was not going to be a pilot.
Ah, I see.
The other thing was that SAC was losing its luster. Air Force was going more toward tactical air command with build up in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And so they were going more into tactical aircraft. And it looked as if SAC itself with the big bombers was sort of going to go away, and which it really has.
So it sounds like you're saying that since you didn't fit into the new Air Force, you just thought perhaps it was time to think about a new career. Am I misreading that?
No, you're reading it pretty well. I still actually hadn't given up the idea of going to medical school. And I said, well, if I could navigate a B-52, maybe I can go to medical school.
Fair enough. If I read the CV correctly, you really had to go back and take some undergraduate science courses in order to get accepted. Right?
Yes. Yeah. So my career has been one of going in one direction and then having to back up and start over again. So,
well, I'm interested in a couple of things. Obviously, as an honors graduate in literature from Sewanee, that speaks to your literary capabilities. Did you find scientific study to be in any way more difficult, or did you fall right into it right away?
My brain was not really constructed along mathematical lines. In fact, I've only flunked one course in my entire life, and that was freshman mathematics. Fortunately, I was able to just dedicate the next 18 months and pick up about 3 years worth of credits. And I said, well, I've got to take the MCAT. And I said, I'm taking the MCAT before I really had any pre-med courses, just because of the way the timing went. So I took the MCAT, and, you don't know how you did on it, but when I applied to medical school at Georgia, they accepted me, which was a very pleasant surprise.
So 1967, you're kind of older than the usual applicant to medical school, around 26, 27, I guess.
I would have been 28 when I graduated, and I applied to one medical school that we won't mention, and they turned me down flat because they said, you're too old.
No kidding.
They did. You're
That's
too
against
old.
the law nowadays.
It is. But then I looked at Georgia, and there was a 67-year-old grandmother who applied for medical school and was admitted. And I said, gosh, that's unusual, until I found out she was the wife of the chairman of the Board of Regents of the medical system of Georgia. So
imagine that.
Yeah. So I said, well, I don't have that going for me.
All right. Well, let's get back to you in medical school. It'd been a while since you were a full-time student, and here you are in this fairly demanding first 2-year curriculum in medical school. Did you find that fairly comfortable, or did you ever have moments where you thought, boy, I've made a mistake? What was going through your head?
I found out that biology, physiology, all of the things that go into medical training, I was very suited for. And I was scared to death when I went because, I was an English major, fighting to find a place among all these scientific graduates, and turned out that I did pretty well with that. So
it sounds like medical school was not just an awful struggle for you. And was your intention to go into surgery there from the beginning, or is that something that evolved during medical school?
I really did not have a particular area that I was going into. I said, I don't really know enough about it, so I think I'll sort of hang loose and see what happens. As it turns out, I loved medical school so much that every course that I went through, at the end of the course, that's what I was going to do.
Is that right?
I said, and except for pathology, I didn't like pathology that much.
That's understandable. It's nice when the patients at least can answer questions.
It turns out that probably my senior year in medical school was when I definitely decided that I wanted to be a surgeon.
And in order to be the best surgeon that you could possibly be, you decided to go to, I guess we could call it a truly old-style surgical training program?
Vanderbilt, yes.
Yeah. And what effect did that have on you?
Damn near killed me. Vanderbilt and Johns Hopkins were sort of on the same track. I think Johns Hopkins was a little bit tougher than Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt was very tough. And the problem wasn't the fact that it was tough. The problem was that they were sort of stuck a little bit in the past in the way they trained people. And 50% of my intern class at Vanderbilt that year left at the end of 1 year rather than stay. And I was among that group.
And what was the plan at that point?
I thought I was actually going to end up staying there, but I made some calls and found out that a couple of different specialties would take me on back down at Georgia. And my feelings about Georgia were so good, and my memories were so great, and the people that I knew were so fine that I said, I think I'd just rather go back to Georgia, even if I'm not going to be trained at the finest college of all. I think Georgia can train anybody as well as any of the major programs can.
Well, I would certainly agree. And I think you might want to mention, I'll give you an opportunity to elaborate, that there was at the time more than one surgical training program in the state of Georgia, the other one being at Emory University, which is a private institution.
Yes.
Medical College of Georgia, MCG, is a state-supported program. And Augusta is sort of a quaint little village, operates at a slower pace, and I think the medical training program does as well. Not that it's insufficient in any way. Would you agree with that?
I would. The Vanderbilt program, you were on call every other night. That didn't turn out to be quite every other night. It turned out to be a whole lot more than that, and which is okay.
Yeah.
They sort of liked you to be there at 4:00 in the morning, which was an improvement over 2 years before that, where they wanted you to be there at 2:00 in the morning.
Wow.
But you ended up doing a lot of scut work, which I already knew how to do. And I was looking for increasing my knowledge base. I found Georgia to be probably more to my liking.
Remember medical school? You were confident, studious, hardworking, and you learned what to expect in all manner of patient care. Then reality struck. Regulations, expenses, staff management, and administration. Is this what we signed up for? Stress on the verge of burnout, no time for family, or the reason we got into medicine. Helping people. What are the options when you're afraid you're in the wrong career? Transition, teach, quit? What if there was another way? MD Coaches can help. We're a team of medical professionals with a century of experience in the clinical and business sides of medicine. More importantly, MD Coaches has been where you are, stressed and trying to navigate a world school didn't prepare us for. MD Coaches is your mentor, your confidant, to help you make your practice shine, navigate administrations, and successfully lead staff and projects. Or if you're ready to transition, we can help there too. MD Coaches is doctors helping doctors. Visit our website to receive a free, no-obligation consultation. Go to mymdcoaches.com/RX. That's mymdcoaches.com/RX. Isn't it time someone else was on your side? Don't let the business of being a doctor stop you from doing what you love. That site again, mymdcoaches.com/RX. Visit us today.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians for physicians to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. So, in addition to a different pace of experience, it also gave you an opportunity to experience some variety. You didn't just head right back into general surgery. You did some other things as well. You want to tell us about that?
After the year at Vanderbilt, I was sort of frustrated, and I said, man, I am really getting killed up here. So I made probably the worst decision of all. I said, I'm going to go into ophthalmology because they can go home at night. So I said, this is probably not going to work. I talked to the guys at Vanderbilt, and they said, well, the waiting list for ophthalmology residencies is about 3 to 5 years. I said, well,
it's hard to get into those things.
I called down to the program director at Georgia, who I knew, and just asked him for his opinion. And he said, let me think about this. So 2 days later, I get a call from him, and he said, the Board of Ophthalmology will give us an additional resident. You can be that resident if you wish.
Kidding.
You have 10 minutes to make up your mind.
Holy cow.
And I said, yeah, holy cow was right. And I said, well, he said, it's 9 minutes. And I said, he said, 8 minutes. And I said, all right, I'll take it.
That's really incredible. I didn't even know that story, and we're about to get into the part of the story where I met you, but that really is fascinating.
Yeah, and that was the story, and it was just an area of my life where I was looking at spending the rest of my life in a very hard job, but I wanted it to be one that I would enjoy and feel comfortable with, and that I would do well with. I ended up leaving ophthalmology, going back into surgery.
And how long did it take you to figure out that was not going to work?
Well, actually about 4 days, but, of course, I had to wait a while before I did that. The interesting thing was that I had other chairmen of the departments come to me and ask me to be in their programs. The plastic surgery chairman wanted me to go into his program, and believe it or not, the chairman of cardiac surgery wanted me to go into his program.
Well, I'm not surprised. You know, you were a standout candidate looking for a place where you could belong.
Wasn't quite sure about that. My wife said that you finish your surgery residency and that's going to take, 2 or 3 more years? He said, well, I hope you're going to have fun being a bachelor. So I said,
oh, my goodness.
I said, well, she's got a point. I am getting a little bit old. But what I really liked was soft tissue surgery where you could really make a difference in whether somebody lived or died.
Which is what you thought you were going to get at Vanderbilt.
Yes, I did. And I didn't want the person who lived or died to be me. So,
so tell us more about what happened at that point. I don't want to steal the story, but I know a lot of people thought that you belonged in academia. I admit to having been one of those. But what happened at that point, and when did you make the decision? How did you make the decision that private practice is where you belonged?
Well, it was over about a 2-year period. Georgia had great faculty, a strong team. They were a team that worked well together. And one of the things I was concerned with about going into academics was politics. I don't do well with politics. I really want to be sort of happy and calm in my professional life and not always looking over my shoulder, which in some programs you have to. I went out for 2 years in private practice, but basically I wasn't really very happy with that because it was smaller town, smaller facilities. I felt that could do better surgery. I was capable of doing better surgery than I would have been able to do at that point. So I talked to them and they said, we would like you to come back on the faculty, which I did.
And which a lot of people were happy about, I might add. Obviously, I was still finishing my training in Augusta at the time, and I think the climate of opinion was Jim Ettien is about to come back and do what he was intended to do. So take it from there.
The program director that we had, Arlie Mansberger, was a great guy. He was a wonderful surgeon, is very intelligent, had a lot of clinical practice behind him as well as academic practice, was in the military and did a lot of trauma studies. So I was very happy with that. The problem that I found was a influx of people in other departments, and the politics became severe. I still don't know whether I made the right decision when I left or not, but I had the opportunity to go to a big multi-specialty group in Florida, and I knew that I would be able to do the type of surgery down there I wanted to do. So sorrowfully said, yeah, I think I'm going to go down there. I would like to stop at this point and just mention that when I was a chief resident, I looked over the new group that came in and I said, I identified one guy who's going to really do well. He's going to be a star. His name is Cook. So first name Randall, but we're going to call him Randy. And I was not wrong. And when I came back, you were chief, and I was concerned about you in just one way. When you were at the VA hospital, you said, I'm going to change the way the VA works. And I said, you ain't going to do that. It is impossible. And you're just going to get frustrated.
Well, at least half of your assumptions about me were correct, and that VA part was right on the money.
As I recall, you did pretty well with the veterans, and the veterans have close relationships with senators and representatives in Congress.
Yep.
And I guess you got one of them really happy because you got a letter from the United States Senator from South Carolina who appointed you chief of staff of the Veterans Hospital there, and you were a resident.
Well, let's get the facts straight. A senator was contacted and did recommend me for a chief of staff's position, but when the lower level bureaucrat figured out what had happened, he was profoundly embarrassed, and that conversation was over.
Right. It's more fun the other way.
Well, I still have the letter from Senator Talmadge hanging on my wall, so it's a story that I treasure as well, and I appreciate you bringing it up. But I want to bring the focus back to you, and that is, we're at the point where you've got to make a decision. Is you're going to turn your life over to academia, or you're going to do something else? And it turned out to be something else. And I'm interested in hearing more about how that came about and how you decided where you were going to go.
I would have loved to have stayed in Augusta and been a clinical professor and so forth, but I was not born in Augusta. I did not grow up in Augusta, and therefore you've got to live in Augusta for about 40 years before you're a newcomer, and you've got to have your family stay there for 3 generations before you're considered a native. So I said, well, that's probably not going to go the way I want. So I called up HCA, which was sort of a new hospital, but they had just built a doctor's hospital in Augusta. I thought HCA was pretty reasonable. So I called the director of physician recruitment, who was a young guy, and I sort of talked to him a little bit. And he said, well, why don't I just come down to Augusta and talk to you in person? But the next day, he called me up and he said, well, I'm not going to come to Augusta. Here's why. He said, I talked to you about this multi-specialty group, a very high-quality group in Florida, and they had 2 surgeons, but they were afraid that these surgeons were going to leave. And he said, they did leave. They left last night in the middle of the night. They backed up a truck to the clinic and took all their stuff and took about half the clinic stuff with it and drove off. They are anxious to talk to you. Well, okay. So I went down there and I said, I think I would have a steady referral base, but the most important thing was I think that my colleagues will be very high quality people. So I eventually ended up going down there, and I was right.
Yeah, it really had a remarkable group of primary care types as a referral base.
I'd been down there for a year or so. When I went down there, I took over the two previous surgeons. They were the only surgeons. They left, and so I was on call for a year. So it was probably the most difficult year I've ever had.
You were literally doing the work that two men had done previously.
Right. So I said, okay, I need some help here. So I thought back and said, well, I remember this guy Cook.
Who may be in federal prison, but
right, but the senator will get him out if he needs to. But I called you up, and you had, of course, some other areas that you could have gone to. I just sat back and waited and hoped you would come, and in fact you did, and we spent many good years together. And we spent several nights working all night, which I've sort of forgotten now, but you were just the finest colleague that I could have, and I was very happy to get you. So
that's very kind of you, and I was very fortunate to get the offer. And you're exactly right. It was something that I think very few freshly trained surgeons get to experience, and that is a practice where they're entirely capable of doing all the things that they were trained to do. And immediately, it was quite an experience. So that brings me to something that I want to pick your brain about a little bit. Unfortunately, I reached a point where I felt like I couldn't stay, and it had everything to do with family obligations back home in Alabama and absolutely nothing to do with my practice. I was in my 40s at the time and not in the mood to start over from zero, but nonetheless, I did have to depart. But over the next 20 years, I guess, after I left, you had an opportunity to watch the evolution of healthcare delivery in the United States as we have come to know it, moving from the private pay environment to the managed care environment. It is a huge change during those years, and I'm interested in your take on that. Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? I'm sure it was a combination of all things, but seeing it play out before your eyes, I'm wondering what your impressions were over those years.
It was some frustration, and the frustration was dealing with the payers. It became very bureaucratic. You would do something that you thought took you a ton of time, a lot of information, a lot of training, and the payer would say, well, we're only going to pay you about 10% of what you billed. So, and those things were frustrating. I could understand part of it, but it was frustrating. The clinic was very helpful because with managed care, if you were a small group, you were at the total mercy of the insurance companies, and they could really hurt you. Some people just left practice because of it. At that time, we had about 50 physicians in our clinic. Suddenly, we were besieged with primary care physicians primarily, and some specialists who were getting really just clobbered by the insurance companies. And they wanted us to take them in. So we actually took them in, but we took them in more as contract people rather than true members, although we did take some in as true members. And at one point, we were responsible for 200 physicians in that area, which was difficult because, trying to get physicians to all go in the same direction is pretty difficult. It's like herding cats, as they say. So
It's a big change. And
it is a big change. It's a big change for them and for us.
Right. During my years there, everybody that referred me a patient was somebody that I knew, that I had a personal relationship with. You know, it was easy to talk to them. But if you're talking about 200, that's an entirely different system.
Yeah. And it wasn't anything that was going to work out. It was too sudden, too drastic. And so it sort of went back to the way it originally was, which I think everybody was happy with, except for a lot of the primary physicians who were back on their own and sort of at a disadvantage.
So it sounds like it was a time when everybody was trying to find their way economically. Well, in any case, you survived that, my friend, thankfully, and I'm not surprised about that. But let's talk about what I think is a fairly remarkable thing that you did sort of as the swan song of your career. And again, this is one of those things that coincidentally you and I did simultaneously, although in different locations. But you got yourself interested in chronic wound care, which turned out to be a more significant need than I dreamed of until I got into it myself. But I would like for you to give us a little bit of that story about your interest in chronic wound care and what you did for the hospital system that you were working for in that regard.
Well, when we came up, I had no idea what I was going to do. I thought I'd probably be working for the VA. And so I was going from being sort of the long-term surgeon in our hospital being out of a job. I was actually employed by HCA. I was the first employed surgeon in the TriStar division. And it wasn't because I was good. It was because they didn't know what the hell else to do with me. I did that and went on staff at the big hospital. I was there for about 4 months.
And this was the typical sort of general and vascular surgery that you'd done for
Yeah, this was basically
30
what
years.
I did.
Yeah.
So I was called into the CEO's office, who he was going to do anything he could for me, but he really didn't. He was getting a lot of heat, I think, from the other surgeons. So he said, I got a call from Southern Hills Hospital, which was a smaller hospital down on the southern edge of Nashville. That's an HCA hospital. And he said, they're having a lot of trouble with their surgeons. They've got 5 surgeons there, and they're just having a lot of trouble. And so their CEO has talked to me, and he's wondering if you would, talk to him or whatever. I said, yeah, I guess so. So I got his name and went back to my office and called him up and talked to him a little bit. And then he said, can you come and have lunch with us tomorrow? I said, yeah. Like I said, I ain't doing much. So I went down for lunch and walked into the room, and there was the entire medical executive staff. And I said, this is interesting. So I talked with them, met with them, and I was originally concerned that this was not a really great hospital, and so forth. This medical staff was impressive, one of the best medical staffs I've ever seen. And for a small hospital, it didn't take us long for me to say, yeah, I'd love to come down there. So I went down, and for the next 14 years I was down there, I guess 14 or 15 years, did a lot of surgery. But he wanted me to do a lot of things. He said, I want you to build a surgical clinic here and high quality surgeons and so forth. And I want you to do this, and I want you to do that. You're going to be chief of surgery. And I said, I'm only a probationary person on the medical staff. I can't be chief of surgery. He said, don't worry about it. I said, well, okay. And he held the last thing until last. I'd been down there for a while, for a couple of weeks. He said, we have the only hospital-based wound care center in the Nashville area. He said, I want you to become the medical director of it. And I said, medical director of wound care? I was sort of taken aback, and I said, well, what do I want to do that for? And he said, it's important to us and so forth. And I said, let me think about it, because, I don't want to spend the rest of my days. I know I'll be doing surgery, And this is only a small part, but I don't want to be putting seaweed on wounds and that sort of thing. So I went home and talked to my wife, and she says, I think you should do it. And I said, why? And she said, well, I think there's a future in it. I think it's important. I think they need people in it. And you're not young, you're getting sort of old, and you're going to have to retire at some point, and that ain't going to be too long. I said, well, you got a point. It wasn't for a couple of years until I found out they were teaming me. They were tag teaming me to get me to do that. That's what they did. It was a conspiracy. But I took the job on, and I was a little bored with it at first, but the more I looked into it, the more I found out that, number one, there's an awful lot of physiology going on in wound care. There's an awful lot of science, and most people aren't doing it at all, and certainly not doing it right. I built up the program here, and I said, really what we need is to have a division-wide wound care system so that the HCA hospitals will have their own programs, because right now all of their wound patients are going out of the system. They patted me on the head and said, that's a nice boy. But we kept going, and eventually we were able to convince them. I got some good people in administration, and we ended up getting a system in the division. But at any rate, until I retired from actual surgery about 5 years ago, and then retired from everything just a few months ago. And the only thing I didn't retire from was I wrote a provider's manual for them, and that was about 3 or 4 years ago. That got a little old. Then I wrote a syllabus for hyperbarics, and that I liked a lot better. And then I said, I need to redo the provider resource manual, but I retired when that was about half finished. So I said, guys, we'll finish it for you. That'll be my present to you. And 3 days ago, I sent the last of it to the printer.
Wow. So this is a momentous occasion.
It is a very momentous occasion.
Well, the only thing that's, to me, really remarkable about that story is that the bureaucrats finally came around. I know that you discovered, just as I discovered, that the scientific basis and the understanding of wound healing physiology is probably one of the most underappreciated and most poorly understood elements of medical care today. I certainly learned a lot in the years that I did it, and obviously you did as well. And to have produced a document of that sort to guide the hospital system was had to be a very satisfying accomplishment for you, in addition to an absolute medal of accomplishment for the hospital system. So my congratulations to you for that. What I want to do at this point is what we came here in the beginning for, and that is to give you a moment to speak to us uninterrupted. So I'm going to close my mic for a moment and invite our audience to listen as Dr. Jim Ettien delivers his own personal prescriptions for success.
Well, I'm not sure most people want to do it the way I did it, which is to make the wrong decision and then have to work hard on it to come up with another decision, which I hope is going to be right. I wish I could say that I was really clever and smart, but I really wasn't. And I did more of my decision making on the basis of, do I like this? Do I want to do this? The actual part of making money didn't really enter into it. I found that wound care is the basis. If you understand wound care, you understand the basis of medicine. You really do, because everything enters into it. And it's hard to try to get a handle on it because it involves all organ systems and all disease processes. And I guess that's where I am. I have no regrets in my career. I have wonderful memories. I've known a lot of wonderful people. The only problem I have with Dr. Cook is he lives too far away from me to visit him often, so that's a problem. But we're going to try to overcome that. And Randy, I think that's all I got to say.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for being here today. And I don't know how to thank you for your kind words. You've always been very generous and very patient with me in that regard. You have always been a great teacher, a great influence, and as always the case, the student often steps in it from time to time, and you have always been there to help me clean up the mess, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for you having been here today. It's been so much fun to sort of relive some of the things that we have endured together. And when we weren't together, we could communicate through the magic of mediums like this. It's really been a great blessing to have been associated with you for all these years. Before we get away, I want to give you an opportunity to tell our audience where they can find you. If you have things that you want to share, like email addresses, websites, business addresses, or so forth, please share it with us now.
Best way to get in touch with me is through email, and that is Ettien, Jettien, @comcast.net. I'm forming a website for our business, Ettien Consultants, LLC.com. So you'll be the first one to get something. So if anybody wants it and can't get hold of me, they can get in hold of you.
Well, we'll be very happy to help you with that. It's always our honor, and we are recording this in the middle of May. We are when we do the publicity for this particular episode, we will certainly include those sorts of things, not only in the verbal communication, but on the podcast website, which is rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And once again, one final thank you so very much to Dr. James Ettien, my friend and my partner for all these years. It's been a terrific conversation, and I really enjoyed chatting with you again. Well, thanks very much for joining me today for my conversation with Dr. Jim Ettien. Before we finish up, don't forget to visit locumstory.com or drpodcastnetwork.com/locumstory to get real, unbiased answers to all your locum tenens questions. And that's all we have for this episode of Prescription for Success. Our theme music is created and performed by Ryan Jones. Remember to follow us at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast download platform. It helps us a lot when you leave us a review and a 5-star rating. Also, we hope you'll visit our website and leave your prescription for success using SpeakPipe. And finally, don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.